deadly virus released by a government mistake. A frantic military willing to stop at nothing to cover up the terrible truth.
The so-called super flu does not exist.
What did you do? What did you people do?
As the plague sweeps out of control, a nation erupts, society crumbles, the end is here.
The monster's here! The darkman's here!
Now, all that remains, the demon, the prophet, and those chosen to survive. The chosen ones stream to Colorado to find their dreams are real.
Help us to be true, dear Lord. Help us to stand.
In Las Vegas, an army of darkness assembles, controlled by dreams of their leader, Randall Flagg.
Go for it.
Do it, Harold! Do it!
It's time to make your stand.
The ultimate stand against the forces of evil. Stephen King's The Stand.
Are you ready to press play?
You already know the big ones. You have seen the lists. You have watched the breakdowns. Everybody and their horror-obsessed uncle has covered it, The Stand, and Salem's Lot like they invented the genre. But here is the part nobody talks about. For every made-for-TV horror film that scared a generation, there were others quietly doing the opposite. Films that did not just fail. Films that actively damaged the genre from the inside out. The 1980s and 1990s were supposed to be the golden age of television horror. The networks had the audience, they had the time slots, and after Salem's Lot proved in 1979 that small-screen horror could genuinely terrify a nation, the door was wide open. What walked through that door, however, was not always what fans were hoping for. Tonight, we are looking at 6 made-for-TV horror films from that era that most channels will never touch, because they are not the success stories. They are the cautionary tales. Films that squandered golden premises, burned audience trust, and one by one convinced network executives that horror on television simply was not worth the investment anymore. 6 films that, whether through bad timing, studio interference, or sheer creative misfires, helped pull the plug on an entire era of small-screen scares.
For those that truly love Halloween.
We have to get off the island right away.
A thrilling Halloween premiere movie. Bay Cup Sunday.
That's strange.
Nicholas and Madeline Klein, betrothed August 7th, 1703.
August 7th, that's today.
Has to be a coincidence.
That would make him over 300 years old, wouldn't it?
Linda thinks that you and Nicholas are 300 years old.
Nikki, show her your license.
Look, it says Nicholas Klein the 6th.
So what does that prove? You can buy a fake license on any street corner in Boston. What about you? Maddie's short for Madeline, isn't it?
Dear, my name is Martha.
See, honey, I told you there was an explanation for everything.
Your son, Nicholas?
He's not my son. He's my grandfather.
Looking for something?
Stay away from me.
I want to live here forever.
Number 6 on our list comes from a year when the networks were still convinced that witches, islands, and paranoid suburban couples were a reliable recipe for primetime dread. The film is Bay Cove, and it aired on NBC on October 25th, 1987, which means it landed right in the middle of Halloween week with every intention of rattling its audience. It did not quite manage that, but what it did instead is actually far more interesting and far more damaging to the genre in the long run. The setup is the kind that practically writes itself. Jerry and Linda LeBon are a young newlywed couple who decide to leave the noise and stress of city life behind and move to a quiet island community off the New England coast. Beautiful scenery, friendly neighbors, a fresh start. If you have seen more than 3 horror films in your life, you already know that every single one of those details is a red flag. The neighbors are a little too friendly. The island is a little too quiet. And the community, as Linda slowly begins to suspect, is hiding something that goes back centuries. What she uncovers is a coven of witches who have been there far longer than anyone admits, and who have very specific plans for the new arrivals. The premise is genuinely solid. A satanic panic thriller dressed up in cozy New England atmosphere, with a cast that included a very young Woody Harrelson before Cheers had made him a household name. On paper, Bay Cove had enough ingredients to be the kind of slow burn that keeps you locked to the couch. The problem was that NBC had absolutely no idea what to do with those ingredients. The pacing moves with the urgency of a town council meeting. The tension that should build steadily across 90 minutes instead flatlines somewhere around the 40-minute mark and never fully recovers. Every time the film edges towards something genuinely unsettling, it pulls back, smooths itself out, and reminds you that this is, after all, a school night. And that is precisely why Bay Cove matters to this list. It was not the worst made-for-TV horror film of its era. It was something more insidious than that. It was a film that proved to network executives that even a strong premise, a capable cast, and a perfectly timed Halloween slot could not save the genre if nobody was willing to commit to actually being scary. The ratings were modest. The reviews were polite in the way that people are polite about a meal they did not enjoy. And somewhere in a boardroom at NBC, a door closed just a little bit more. Bay Cove is still out there if you want to track it down, and there is a specific kind of pleasure in watching it today. The pleasure of seeing exactly where it all went wrong. But as a horror film designed to frighten an audience, it is less a haunted house and more a nicely decorated living room with the lights left on.
The final conflict between good and evil has begun. Brad Davis, Anthony Dennison, Child of Darkness, Child of Light on USA Today.
If Bay Cove proved that a good premise could be quietly suffocated by network timidity, then the next film on our list proved something even more frustrating. It proved that you could take a genuinely chilling concept, attach a respected author's name to it, hire a competent director, and still produce something so thoroughly mediocre that audiences forgot it existed before the end credits finished rolling. This is Child of Darkness, Child of Light, a USA Network television film that premiered on May 1st, 1991, and then proceeded to disappear from the cultural conversation almost immediately afterward. The foundation here is legitimately unsettling. Two teenage girls in different parts of the country both become pregnant under impossible circumstances. Both are virgins. One of them, according to an ancient prophecy delivered to the Vatican, is carrying the second coming of Christ. The other is carrying the Antichrist. The Vatican dispatches a priest to America to figure out which is which before it is too late. That is the entire race against time at the center of this film. And if you are thinking that sounds like the kind of premise that could power a genuinely tense, theologically creepy horror thriller, you are absolutely right. It should have. It did not. The film is based on an early novel by James Patterson, written long before he became the airport bookstore institution we know today, back when he was still experimenting with darker material. The source novel had real teeth. It leaned into the horror of faith, the terror of not knowing which child was which, and the psychological unraveling of a priest who realizes that God's plan and a happy ending are not necessarily the same thing. The television adaptation filed all of that down to a smooth, inoffensive surface. What arrives on screen is less a horror film and more a procedural drama about a mildly concerned clergyman filling out supernatural paperwork. The cast does what it can. Cella Ward appears in an early role that she has presumably made peace with over the years. The production looks exactly like what it is, a mid-budget cable movie shot quickly and efficiently with no particular appetite for risk. The scenes that should feel apocalyptic feel like a Tuesday. The scenes that should feel intimate and frightening feel like a wellness check. And the ending, which in the novel carries genuine moral ambiguity, arrives on television with all the impact of a polite knock on a door that nobody answers. What Child of Darkness, Child of Light did to the genre was plant a specific kind of doubt in the minds of cable executives. If even a James Patterson horror property, adapted with a real budget and a real cast, could generate this little excitement, then what exactly was the upside of investing in made-for-TV horror at all? It was a question that would keep coming up, and the answers kept getting worse. Now we arrive at number 4, and this one requires a moment of silence for what could have been. The Haunting of Helen Walker aired on CBS on December 3rd, 1995, which tells you something right away. December, not October. Not the Halloween window when horror films belong. CBS scheduled this one in the dead of winter, buried it opposite a splashy ABC musical remake that drew over 13 million viewers the same night, and then acted surprised when nobody showed up. That programming decision alone is a small masterpiece of self-destruction, but it is not even the most interesting thing about why this film belongs on this list. The source material is Henry James's novella, The Turn of the Screw, which is one of the most psychologically sophisticated ghost stories ever written. The story follows a young governess hired to care for 2 children at a remote English estate, who begins to suspect that the ghosts of 2 former servants are possessing the children from beyond the grave. What makes James's original so powerful is the uncertainty at its core. You are never entirely sure whether the supernatural events are real or whether the governess is simply losing her mind. That ambiguity is the entire engine of the terror. Remove it, and you have a period drama with some foggy windows. The Haunting of Helen Walker removes it. The film stars Valerie Bertinelli in the lead role, and she brings genuine commitment to a project that does not always deserve it. Diana Rigg appears in a supporting role with the quiet dignity of someone who has read better scripts, but is determined to elevate this one anyway. The English estate is atmospheric. The children are appropriately unsettling. The production design does its job. On a purely technical level, there is nothing embarrassing about this film. The embarrassment is entirely conceptual. By making the ghosts definitively real and the supernatural threat completely unambiguous, the filmmakers took James's masterpiece of psychological dread and turned it into a fairly conventional haunted house story. The question that should haunt every frame, is she seeing things or is this actually happening, gets answered about 20 minutes in and never asked again. What remains is competent, watchable, and utterly forgettable in the way that only a film with genuine potential can be forgettable. It is the horror equivalent of ordering a steak and receiving a very adequate chicken sandwich. CBS never scheduled another horror film in that time slot. The Haunting of Helen Walker was not the reason the network gave up on the genre, but it was a very clean illustration of the problem. When you take something that should be genuinely frightening, sand down every sharp edge for a general audience, and then schedule it where nobody can find it, you are not making a horror film. You are making an apology for one.
From the best-selling novel by Stephen King.
Where is everybody? They've all gone.
Is the plane in trouble, mister?
Where is everybody?
What's going on here?
Across the boundaries of time.
Mayday, Mayday, this is American Pride, Flight 29, requesting emergency aid.
So... this place is utterly, totally deserted.
Air Force Control, this is American Pride, Flight 29. Do you read me, over?
Beyond the gateway to another world.
We're no longer in our own time, ladies and gentlemen.
It's really wrong here.
You're all dead.
Something is waiting for you to arrive.
It's coming! Don't you understand?
Something's coming towards us, rather nasty.
They are predators.
They are going to chew the eyes right out of your head.
They are relentless.
The Langoliers are coming. They're coming for you.
And they are very, very hungry.
They will eat you alive! Alive and screaming!
By 1995, ABC had a system. When in doubt, call Stephen King. It had worked before, spectacularly so, and the network had every reason to believe it would work again. So when they greenlit a 2-part miniseries adaptation of King's novella The Langoliers, premiering May 14th and 15th of 1995, there was genuine anticipation behind it. Stephen King adaptations on television had earned their reputation. Audiences showed up. Critics paid attention. And The Langoliers had the kind of premise that felt tailor-made for the small screen, intimate, claustrophobic, and deeply weird in a way that rewarded patient viewers. What aired over those 2 nights was something that tested the patience of even the most devoted King faithful, and in doing so, dealt a quiet but significant blow to the credibility of the entire made-for-TV horror format. The setup is one of King's most original. A red-eye flight from Los Angeles to Boston passes through some kind of temporal anomaly while most passengers are asleep. When they wake up, the majority of the plane is gone, only 11 people remain. They land at Bangor Airport in Maine and discover that the world outside is completely empty. The food has lost its taste, the air has gone stale, and somewhere in the distance, something is coming. Something that eats the past. The Langoliers of the title are not metaphorical. They are very literal, very hungry creatures that consume reality itself once the present moment has moved on, and they are heading straight for the airport. On the page, this is genuinely unsettling material. King uses the premise to explore regret, the tyranny of the past, and the particular horror of being trapped in a moment that the universe has already discarded. The character work is rich. The dread is atmospheric and slow-burning in exactly the right way. There is a villain in the story, a brittle, unraveling businessman named Craig Toomey, whose psychological deterioration runs parallel to the supernatural threat and gives the whole thing a grounded human horror that elevates it well above standard monster fare. The miniseries captures some of that. The early scenes on the empty plane are effective. The Bangor airport sequences have a genuine eeriness to them, and Tom Holland, who directed the whole production, understands pacing well enough to let the mystery breathe before the answers arrive. The problem, and it is a problem that becomes impossible to ignore, is the Langoliers themselves. When the creatures finally appear on screen in the second half, rendered in computer-generated effects that looked unconvincing in 1995 and look absolutely prehistoric today, the accumulated tension of everything that came before evaporates almost instantly. They look like angry meatballs with teeth. There is no diplomatic way to say it. The monsters that were supposed to be the terrifying payoff of a two-night television event look like a screensaver from a computer lab at a community college. King himself adapted the screenplay, which makes this a rare case of an author personally contributing to the undermining of his own work. The decision to show the creatures fully and repeatedly, rather than keeping them at the edge of vision where imagination could fill in the gaps, was a creative choice that the budget simply could not support. And when the central horror of your horror film becomes the thing the audience is laughing at rather than fearing, the genre does not recover from that easily. The Langoliers is remembered today primarily as a meme, and a genre that becomes a meme is a genre in serious trouble.
A deadly virus released by a government mistake. A frantic military willing to stop at nothing to cover up the terrible truth.
The so-called super flu does not exist.
What did you do? What did you people do?
As the plague sweeps out of control, a nation erupts, society crumbles, the end is here.
The monster's here! The doctor's here!
Now, all that remains, the demon, the prophet, and those chosen to survive. The chosen ones stream to Colorado to find their dreams are real.
Help us to be true, dear Lord. Help us to stand.
In Las Vegas, an army of darkness assembles, controlled by dreams of their leader, Randall Flagg.
Go for it.
Do it, Harold, do it!
It's time to make your stand.
The ultimate stand against the forces of evil. Stephen King's The Stand.
There is a particular kind of ambition that is more dangerous than incompetence. Incompetence makes bad films. Ambition, unchecked and under-resourced, makes something far more damaging. It makes films that almost work. Films that gesture at greatness so convincingly that their ultimate failure stings in a way that a straightforwardly bad movie never could. The Stand is that kind of film. It aired on ABC across 4 consecutive nights in May of 1994, running a total of 6 hours, and it arrived with the kind of promotional weight that suggested the network genuinely believed it was about to change television forever. It did change television, just not in the direction anyone was hoping. Stephen King's novel, The Stand, is, depending on who you ask, either his magnum opus or the most indulgent thing he ever put his name on. The uncut version runs over 1,100 pages and tells the story of a weaponized superflu that kills over 99% of the human population, followed by a biblical confrontation between the survivors of good and evil in the American heartland. It is an apocalyptic epic with dozens of fully realized characters, an enormous physical scope, and a theological ambition that swings between genuine profundity and spectacular corniness depending on the chapter. Adapting it for television was either an act of courage or an act of hubris, and the line between those two things turned out to be very thin indeed. The miniseries has real strengths, and they deserve acknowledgement before the accounting of its failures begins. The casting is frequently inspired. Gary Sinise brings quiet authority to the role of Stu Redman, the everyman survivor at the moral center of the story. Ruby Dee is genuinely moving as Mother Abigail, the 108-year-old prophet who serves as the beacon for the forces of good, and Jamie Sheridan as Randall Flagg, King's ultimate embodiment of supernatural evil, commits to the role with a gleeful, slightly unhinged energy that is either brilliant or ridiculous, depending on your tolerance for that particular frequency of performance. For the first 2 nights, the miniseries holds together remarkably well. The plague sequences are effective. The emptied cities carry real weight. The gathering of survivors has momentum and genuine emotional investment. Then the back half arrives, and the whole structure begins to buckle under its own ambitions. The theological confrontation that King builds toward across 1,100 pages requires a visual and emotional payoff that a 1994 television budget simply cannot provide. The final showdown in Las Vegas, which in the novel carries the weight of everything that preceded it, lands on screen with a whimper dressed up as a bang. The special effects that were supposed to convey divine intervention look like outtakes from a mid-budget science fiction film. Characters who spent 2 nights earning the audience's investment are dispatched with a speed that feels almost contemptuous. And the epilogue, which King himself adapted and in which he also appears in a small acting role, goes on long enough to outlast the goodwill generated by everything that worked. What The Stand did to the made-for-TV horror landscape was establish a ceiling. It demonstrated, with 6 hours of evidence, that the format could not sustain the kind of epic ambition that the genre's best material demanded. Smaller stories could survive the constraints of network television budgets and broadcast standards. Apocalyptic ones could not. Every network executive who watched the back half of The Stand learned the same lesson, and that lesson was not to try harder. It was to stop trying altogether. Which brings us, inevitably, to number 1. Everything on this list has been building to this moment, and the cruel irony of number 1 is that it is not a bad film. It is not even close to a bad film. It, 1990, is, by almost any reasonable measure, the most successful made-for-TV horror film of its entire era. It aired on ABC on November 18th and 20th of 1990. It drew enormous ratings. It terrified a generation of American children so thoroughly that the clown phobia industry has never fully recovered, and it launched Tim Curry's performance as Pennywise the Dancing Clown into the kind of cultural permanence that most actors spend entire careers chasing without ever reaching. So why is it number 1 on a list of films that killed the genre? Because of exactly that. Because it was so good, so successful, and so impossible to follow that it became the thing that made everything after it look like a failure by comparison. It did not kill made-for-TV horror with its weakness. It killed it with its strength. Stephen King's novel is one of the great American horror stories, a 700-page excavation of childhood fear, small-town rot, and the particular cruelty of forgetting. The story follows 7 outcasts in the fictional town of Derry, Maine, who as children confront an ancient shape-shifting evil that preys on their deepest fears, most often appearing as Pennywise, a clown with a smile full of teeth and eyes that have seen the inside of every nightmare you have ever had. 30 years later, the survivors are called back to Derry because it has returned, and the battle they thought they finished in childhood turns out to have been only the first round. The miniseries captures the childhood half of that story with a precision and an atmospheric dread that genuinely earns its reputation. The scenes set in 1960s Derry have texture and weight. The young cast delivers performances that feel lived in rather than performed. And Tim Curry, working with prosthetics, a red suit, and what appears to be a direct line to the part of the human brain that processes primal terror, creates something that transcends the limitations of the format entirely. There are individual scenes in the first half of this miniseries that are as effective as anything the horror genre produced in that decade, in any medium. The storm drain scene alone has kept more American children away from street gutters than any public safety campaign ever mounted. The second half, set in the adult present, is considerably weaker, and the finale involves a giant spider that carries a family resemblance to the Langoliers creatures in terms of what the budget was able to convincingly deliver. But the first half is so strong that it carries the entire production across the finish line on momentum alone. When it ended its 2-night run, it had done something that nothing on this list managed to do. It had reminded America that made-for-TV horror could be genuinely, profoundly frightening. It had raised the bar to a height that the format had never previously reached, and then nobody could clear it. Every made-for-TV horror film that came after it lived in its shadow. Executives greenlit projects hoping to replicate its success and discovered that Tim Curry and a perfect storm of casting, writing, and atmospheric direction were not things you could simply manufacture on demand. Audiences who had been electrified by it sat down for the next network horror event and found Cove. They found Child of Darkness, Child of Light. They found the Langoliers CGI creatures and the back half of The Stand. Each disappointment eroded a little more of the goodwill that it had generated. Each failed attempt made the next attempt harder to justify. By the late 1990s, the networks had quietly stopped trying. The format that had once put Salem's Lot and Duel and The Night Stalker into living rooms across America folded not with a dramatic cancellation announcement, but with a slow, bureaucratic shrug. It did not intend any of this. It was simply the best version of what made-for-TV horror could be, arriving at the exact moment when the genre needed a miracle and could not afford the consequences of one. The greatest horror film the small screen ever produced turned out to be the last great argument for its own existence. And when that argument could not be answered, the conversation simply ended. 6 films. 6 different ways a genre can lose its footing and never quite find it again. Some failed because of budget. Some failed because of timing. Some failed because the people in charge simply did not believe in what they were making enough to take a real risk. And one succeeded so completely that it made failure inevitable for everything that followed. Made-for-TV horror did not die because audiences stopped caring. It died because the industry stopped trusting that audiences could handle something genuinely frightening on a Tuesday night in their own living rooms. And if that does not strike you as at least a little bit horrifying, then we have not been doing our job. So here is the question we want to leave you with today. Is there a made-for-TV horror film from this era that you think deserves to be on this list? Or one that you think we were too hard on? Drop it in the comments below, because some of the best conversations on this channel start exactly there. If you are new here, and this is the kind of deep dive that speaks to your particular brand of obsession, the subscribe button is right there, and it costs you nothing. And if you want more, our last video goes places that this one only gestured at. You will find it waiting for you. We will see you in the dark.